Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. This webinar is brought to you by Strategies 2.0, a statewide collaborative funded by the California Office of Child Abuse Prevention. Today's webinar is part 2 of a 2-part series from ACES Connection. Our topic today is Starting Your Resilience Initiative. The webinar is scheduled from 1 until 2:30 p.m. I am Carrie Collins, and I will be your facilitator today. My role is to introduce the topic and the presenters to you to keep track of time and to help our presenters and all of you participants in any way that you may need. In a moment, I will introduce the presenters to you, but first I'd like to go over a few of the webinar guidelines with you. So all of you should have a taskbar, and you have a red arrow that will control that taskbar. If you want to minimize it, you just click on that red arrow and it will minimize your taskbar. You joined us today by either your telephone or your microphone and speakers in your computer. If you find that the sound is a little warbled, we would suggest that you change over to your telephone. We seem to get better sound when you are on your telephone. Now, when you do get on by telephone, it's very important that you enter in the access code with the pound sign, and then there is a PIN number that you enter. It's usually a 1 or 2 number PIN number with also a pound sign. If you don't do that and you want to ask a question later on, we will not be able to unmute you. So we're going to do some things in the chat box today. There's going to be some questions that the presenters will be asking you, and we hope that you will participate by putting your responses into the chat box. And also, if you have a question for the presenters, this is a really good place for you to do that. We also will be doing a couple of polls in the process of the presentation today, so we hope that you will participate in those. It's really fun to see the responses that we get from all of you, the participants. If you would like to ask your question in person, you just need to raise your hand. There's a little hand icon on your taskbar, and if you raise your hand, then I can unmute you and you can ask your question. Now, I have muted all of you, so you do not need to be worried about any background noise that you maybe have going on either in your office or in your home, so don't worry about that. I have all of you muted. So with that, I would like to introduce our speakers today. You see 4 names up here, but we actually only have 2 presenters. We have Danielle Prince. She is the community facilitator for the San Francisco Bay Area, and Gail Kennedy is the facilitator for the Capital Region and Central Valley. We wanted to have Karen and Laura's names and areas up there for you because we're hoping that following this webinar, you may want to get in touch with the facilitators that correspond to your area. So the facilitators that you see with us today are facilitators with the ACES Connection, and they work with communities, organizations, and individuals within a geographic region to prevent, address, and heal the trauma of ACEs and build individual and community resilience. Community facilitators seek ways to accelerate existing initiatives that you may have and supporting local community efforts. Working in partnership with communities, they seek to accelerate the resilience and ACEs science movement. So with that, I am now going to turn over to Gail Kennedy, who's going to be our first presenter today. And we will just do a real quick little switch. And Gail, you are now.
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you, Carrie. Can everybody see my screen? Let's see. Okay, now you should be able to see it. Everybody see my screen?
Yes, but you need to go up into that.
Oh, that's right. I need to do this. Okay, there we go. So thank you, Carrie, for that introduction. We don't need to do that right now. Thank you for the introduction. First, what I want to do today is just to give you a little where we're going in our presentation today. So what I'd like to do is do a brief recap about as Carrie said, this is a series. This is number 2 of a series. So I just want to do a really brief recap of ACES Connection, and then the webinar number 1, which was Healing Communities Through Connections. And then we'll get into the bulk of the presentation today, which is tips for starting and organizing your ACES initiative. And then we'll just at the end try to link back the resources, the tips that we're going to be sharing with you, link it back to where you can find resources and tools on ACES Connection. And then, of course, we want your feedback and any questions, and hopefully there'll be time for any questions and a discussion through the chat and through a couple of polls that we have. So first of all, here's our first poll. I wanted to ask who's on today. So if you can take the poll, Carrie will summarize it for us, but what region are you from? So you have the choice of saying Northern. So the poll is open. I see that the poll is open. So please say if you're from the Northern California region, from the Bay Area and Capital region, that's a separate one, from the Southern California region, from the Central Valley, or from the Eastern California Sierra region.
Okay, great. I can see that 64%, we're up to 68% of you have voted so far. I'm going to keep this open for about 5 more seconds. So I'm going to count down 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And with 88% of you, so we have 5% from Northern California, 27% from Bay Area Capital, 41% from Southern California, go Southern California, 18% Central Valley, and 9% Eastern California Sierra region.
Thank you, Carrie. That's wonderful. That's wonderful that we have all regions represented. That is exciting to us. And what we'll do is, all of this stuff is useful for everybody across the region. Yes, Sacramento is actually Bay Area and Capital region is part of Sacramento. So if you coded yourself Central Valley, it should be Bay Area and the Capital region. So. But that's great that we've got statewide representation. That makes me happy. So I'm just going to do really brief. Carrie already went through these, but no need to raise your hand. We have the Q&A icon there to ask any questions. We will ask questions. We have plenty of time scheduled in for questions. We are embedding a couple of chats throughout, so there'll be times for you to chat, and both the presenters, Danielle and I, see the chats that come through. So if there's anything that we need to answer, we can do that. This session will be recorded and it will be available, and we'll actually share with you where it's going to be available and where the previous webinar was available. We'll get to that in a minute. And please, or any questions or anything that we don't get to during the allotted time in the webinar, because it's an hour and a half, hard stop, an hour and a half. But we will absolutely summarize and answer the question on ACES Connection, and we'll show you where those will be as we move on. Okay, so first of all, who are we at ACES Connection? So we're the human and digital catalyst that grows and supports the worldwide ACES and resilience movement, and we tell its authentic stories. So our vision is a resilient world where all people thrive. I encourage you, if you aren't a member of ACES Connection, to go to ACES Connection and join, and I'm going to show you how to do that in just a minute. So as Carrie said, here are the 4 of us community facilitators. So we're the ACES Connection staff that support California. So you'll see it's color-coded, who we are and where we are located, and so what counties we support across the state. And these slides, I should have said, these slides are going to be available as well. So you not only will have the recording available, but the slides available. So you don't have to scramble to write down our emails if you want to reach out to us. And this slide will come up at the end as well. But I just wanted to say that we're part of a growing movement. ACES Connection has over 33,000 at this point, 33,000 members. We're international in scope. We have people from all over the United States and all over the world, more and more now all over the world. But as you will see in a minute, we have more presence in California. We are funded by the California Endowment and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, but the California Endowment we're so grateful because it's enabled us to have more staff available in California to help support this movement. So next poll, really quickly, are you currently a member of ACES Connection? Carrie, you want to open the poll for us? Okay, the poll is open, so please say yes, no, and if you're not sure, that's totally fine. So just please say yes, no, or not sure.
Okay, we'll wait a few more seconds to get some more votes in there. I'm going to go ahead and close this up in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So with 74% voting, there's our results. Do you see that, Gail?
I don't. Remember, I don't see it.
Okay, that's right. So yes is 45% yes, 40% no, and 15% not sure.
Okay. All right. So let me, okay. So what I'm going to do now, this is so exciting. What I'm going to do now is go live on ACES Connection. And it'll just take a minute, but what we're going to do is go to the website so that I can show all of you that aren't members yet how to join. And if you look right, let me just hide this a little bit. There we go. Oh, it logs me in. Okay, right up here, and hopefully you don't see that. Right up here, it should say join. If you are not a member and not logged in, right across the homepage, it should say join. There's a button, and you click on that button to join ACES Connection. And we're a social networking site. I like to kind of describe us as the Facebook of the ACES movement. And we try to create a safe space for those of us that are involved in this effort and want to connect with each other. And so we will not we register everybody. We check to be sure that everybody that signs up is a real person. So it usually takes a day or so once you have signed up to join to be accepted and in. So bear with us if you've signed up and want to be sure that you're a member. So that's how you join. Now, the other thing I want to point out, I just want to point out a couple of things, because a lot of folks that are members of ACES Connection, what we do is we send out email daily updates of news and information. So most folks get that. A daily and a weekly, we call it the Daily Digest and the Weekly Digest. So you get those, and those are from the home site, our blog posts and I'll scroll down, you can see a couple of the blog posts that just came up just recently. But we also have communities here, and the communities are where you can find, and I'll show you this in a minute, but this is where we basically call them mini ACES Connection that are available for your communities. And that's what we're going to really focus on today, is how to support your local ACEs initiative in your community. So I just wanted to point out this tab right here on the home page that will give you a list. I'll just click on it really quickly. It's a list of all the communities, and you can search by your community or all communities. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that now, but that's how you find it. The next thing I want to show you is called Mapping the Movement. And this will show you, hopefully it will load up. If not, I'm going to go back to my slides. But this Mapping the Movement will show you this. This is a picture. It actually, I'm just waiting. I'll go back to it and it probably will show. But this shows you, this is just the United States. These are all the ACEs initiatives, all the ACEs Connection community initiatives that we have that are from the United States. So I think I mentioned earlier, California has now the East Coast is kind of catching up with us, but California has a lot of communities. And this is a great, the Mapping the Movement is actually international, so we do have some communities that are all over the world, but I wanted to focus and be able to make sure that you could see the wealth of communities that we have all over the United States. And because I'm not live, I can't click on this, but if you click, when it's live on the Mapping Movement button, you click on any button and up comes the name of the community. So that is a tool that I wanted to be sure that you know about. But what I want to do, because we've got California here, I want to take us to the community called California ACEs Action. And this is the statewide community we have for California. So I highly encourage you that are members of ACEs Connection and those that aren't, once you join ACEs Connection, to sign up to be a part of California ACEs Action. You can join right here. If you aren't a member, this little red button comes up that says join this community. And what we do is we post things that are happening at the state level. We support different initiatives that are happening at the state, and I'm sure you all know there's a lot happening at the state here in California with our new first ever Surgeon General, who is very supportive, and it's her mission is to raise awareness about ACEs. So we have a lot of great materials that are coming out on the California ACEs Action, and if you join the California ACEs Action, we have a newsletter that we publish twice a month that goes out. But what I wanted to show you today is clicking here. So this is right on the home page, and here's this map, California ACEs Connection Communities. And if you click on that hyperlink right there, it gives you a list of all of the communities, the ACEs Connection communities that we have in the state. So if you're from the Central Valley, from Fresno County by chance, you can click on Fresno County and it will take you right to Fresno County's ACEs and Fresno County's Trauma and Resilience Network. And then you can see what great work that they're doing in Fresno County. So I'm back to my slides. Now I'm going to shift. So that was just a little bit of info about ACEs Connection, and if you want more at the end, we can help you out with anything at the end of the presentation. But what I want to do right now is focus on, let's do another poll. Were you on the last ACEs Connection webinar? Yes, no, or you're not sure. And it was about a month and a half ago. So please answer the poll. Were you on the last ACEs Connection Strategies webinar? Yes, no, or unsure.
Right. So we have 63% that are, higher than that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close this poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And I will share the results. So we have 18% yes, 68% no, and 14% not sure. I understand that not sure category.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Carrie. So this is just a very quick review about the webinar that we did about a month and a half ago, Healing Communities Through Connections. Our learning objectives for the webinar were an overview of the 5 aspects of ACEs science. And then we did some overview of trauma-informed principles and practices and how they apply in communities and organizations. And then an overview of ACEs Connection and communities and some of our resources and strategies. So that was the webinar. And as you see right down here at the bottom is a link to the recording of the webinar. So just wanted to share that with you. And today, the main agenda for today will be covering mission and value statements. So it's basically how do you start and organize your ACEs initiative. So Danielle will be going through the bulk of the session today on mission and value statements, creating norms, strategic planning, and tips for organizing an initiative. And then just really quickly, what we're planning to do is we realized that we had too much to cover on starting an ACEs initiative, so we're going to do a future webinar on growing your ACEs initiative. We have tools that are available for showing your progress in your community, and then some tips and tricks on getting unstuck, addressing challenges and ebbs and flows in the membership, in the focus, in the planning, strategic planning, and then funding for your resilience initiative. And we're already in the progress of inviting some community leaders, community champions throughout California to join us on that webinar. So please stay tuned for details and to register. We'll get you information on that on the California ACEs Action site. And Carrie, I assume strategies will get information out. So it'll either be a joint collaboration just like this with Strategies 2.0, or it will be with ACEs Connection. So stay tuned. We're taking a hiatus for the summer, just like Strategies does, and so it will be in early fall. We'll get that. But I want to turn it back over to, this is what we're going to be talking about today, and I'm going to do my best to turn this over to Danielle. Yes.
Okay, this is Danielle, and as I'm showing my screen, which should pop up in a moment. Let's see. Okay. Just making sure. Okay. So I'm Danielle Prince, and I'm the community facilitator for the San Francisco Bay Area for ACEs Connection. And part of what I do, the communities that Gail pointed to on the website, I help support the ones that are in the Bay Area, whether they're online or they're, in addition to being online, they're also doing they're meeting in person or creating events. I also help support that process, especially when people are getting started. And when people are just thinking about getting started, I'm happy to come and do presentations for organizations that think they might want to gather together and create a ACEs or resilience initiative. So that's my role. And I'm going to be talking today about some of the early steps that organizations take. And what we've done is think through some of the steps that have been most effective and kind of gotten people rolling and helped them gather momentum in those early stages. So that's what we're focusing on today. So as Gail mentioned, the previous webinar went more into detail in terms of defining terms, what is ACEs, what is resilience. So we're not going to go over that today, but just to get us all on the same page, this slide gives some information about what we do know about ACEs. It's a public health issue that needs to be addressed at the community level, because one of the most significant findings of that ACEs study, as you can see in the quote on the left side of your slide, there's serious health consequences to untreated trauma. And so we want to do whatever we can to help prevent as much as possible. And even when we haven't prevented trauma, we want to be able to heal it, because we know we not only heal people emotionally, but we increase their longevity. For a long time in our society, when we talked about trauma, we were speaking of medical, physical trauma or traumatic stress that occurred with veterans. And what ACEs gives us is a common language and a way of understanding the way neglect, abuse, and household challenges and chaos actually impact developing children and stay with them throughout their lives. And it's not just their behaviors or social behaviors, but it's the way that we regulate our emotions and even our physiology and how we relate to ourselves, to others, and our community. So the impact of trauma is huge, and it's something we should urgently address at the community level. And so if you're familiar with SAMHSA, it's a federal agency, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, took an interest in the research on ACEs, the original ACEs study, and came up with some observations of how we get started. So I wanted to share those. The SAMHSA agency has been very supportive in providing grants to communities to start to figure this out. So as you can see here, they make some key observations about why we need to address ACEs at the community level. Building resilient and trauma-informed communities is essential to improving public health and well-being for the reasons I just discussed. Communities can be places where traumatic events occur, and they can also help keep us safe. They can be a source of trauma or buffer us against the negative effects of adversity. So how do we build community initiatives that can help community members, organizations that serve people in those communities, city leadership, figure out how can we best become communities that are actually resilient communities where we can prevent a lot of this trauma, we can help people find healing. And communities can collectively experience trauma much like individuals do, but communities can also be a resource for healing. So these are some of the observations from the many different groups that have benefited from SAMHSA's interest in this topic. Next, we're going to do a quick chat. We just want to know who on the call is already involved, even if it's at the very beginning stages in an ACEs initiative in your community. So if you could use the chat box and just share a sentence or two about if you're in an initiative and where it's at and what you're working on, we would love to. I'm going to give people about 1 minute to type your answers, and then we'll share a few before we move on. And I think Gail is gonna share with us a couple of those.
So Carrie, am I not seeing them? I'm not seeing anything.
I can see them. For now, I can go ahead and pitch in.
Okay. I'm not seeing.
So yeah, there's a drop down that helps you see the chat, but I'll go ahead. So I hear that Karen Woods is in the process of creating an ACEs initiative with Gail. Okay, that's awesome.
Oh, hi, Karen.
Yep. And Ann Nguyen is not involved but very interested, so I hope you will reach out to the community facilitator nearest you, who will be very happy to hear from you, either connect you with what's already going on or even better, get another initiative going, because these could be at county level, they could be at city level. If people are arranging them in a lot of different ways, and it's all needed, and there's increasing interest. And then from Ashley Conrad, I see that you're not in an initiative, but increasing your knowledge, and you plan to share the webinars. Great, with your supervisor. You're with a family resource center. Oh, that's great. That was one of the things that we were really hoping was going to be an outcome of our doing these webinars and doing this collaboration with Strategies 2.0 and ACEs Connection. So thank you for those that shared, and I think there will continue to be some comments that come through. I'm going to going to move on, but I encourage you to continue sharing on this question because you're also communicating with each other, and we'll also be able to save this information and reach out for those of you who have said that you are interested in starting an initiative, and as well as if you started an initiative we don't know about, we want to know about it so we can talk about it on ACES Connection and make sure others know the good work that you're doing.
And when you say who you are, just say where you're from, because that will help us at ACES Connection know who should reach out to you if you're interested.
Yeah, and I see
now I can see it. Danielle.
Okay, great. And Annabelle Weekly has said that your center is interested in working with local school districts to work collaboratively as well as with your center clients, which is great because school districts are really starting to pick up on the value to the issue of classroom management. Turns out to be a lot deeper than just some simple strategies to keep kids engaged. But when you put it in that trauma-informed perspective, I think that that can be a real support to teachers. So that's great to hear, and I think we can connect you with some of the with others who are doing that work. So great. Thank you to everyone who participated in the chat. Okay, so I'm going to go on. Oh, go ahead, Gail. Is that Gail?
No, that's great. That's good.
Okay.
That's all.
Okay. And so next, this slide is also from SAMHSA, that same agency. And in their work, again, they were granting people and granting different efforts that were going on, and then studying those efforts so they could share this more widely throughout the country. And so this question of what does a trauma-informed community look like, these were some overarching points that they pulled from all of that data. So employing a community-driven multi-sector approach, that is the number one. At ACES Connection, we know that every community is different, so every community's resilience initiative is going to look different, but the common thread and the one that we really push on early on is that it needs to be community-wide and multi-sector. Having separate sectors go at this and are not talking to each other, it makes it much more difficult to have that overall impact on the community. So we always want to see who's at the table, and we even have a tool for just a reminder to look through and see which sectors are missing. And then we also are able to point people to resources that show how do you engage the faith-based sector, or how do you engage sectors that aren't at the table yet. And one of the ways is just showing them how in another community those sectors are at the table and look at the great work that they're doing. So that was an observation that SAMHSA made with their national focus, that it does need to be multi-sector in order to be a trauma-informed community. It needs to be inclusive, viewing all residents as assets. That's very important. Cares for the most vulnerable, with a focus on prevention, early intervention, and healing, all of those stages. It uses data and research to guide decisions. That becomes important because each community is also different. So you're going to need to focus on your resources in different areas depending on what types of adversity are being experienced in your community. So data and research can be a very valuable tool in figuring out where those resources should go. And then a good trauma-informed community initiative breaks cycles of trauma and stops re-traumatization. And that point also links back to the importance of the cross-sector work. If we don't in our various fields and our various work that we do, we don't all have the same perspective. And one thing that information about ACEs, trauma and resilience, as it gives us a common language across all different fields to understand what's going on with people when they come to us for services or we're interacting with them as fellow community members or neighbors. And it gives us an idea of the kind of ways that we can react that can improve the situation versus escalating those problems through re-traumatization. And a lot of service providers, community members don't necessarily know that their responses are re-traumatizing. So a good community initiative helps people at the individual level and the organizational service providing level and at the city leadership level to understand that concept and then what to do to change that reaction cycle. And then is going to include a good trauma-informed community initiative is going to include dialogue about structural violence and oppression. So understanding that some of the issues that create trauma for people are things not just that are private and individual in their households, but are also happening in their environment. And once we have an understanding of that, and we're including that in the conversation, we can take steps at the policy level and at the practice level to address and reverse those sources of trauma. And then the final point is a trauma-informed community has teachers, police, social workers, youth workers, and other members of the workforce trained in trauma-informed practices. And what I've found working with communities is after they've taken the steps to educate themselves and each other about ACEs and trauma and resilience and what all of those things are, all those things that we went over in the first webinar. Once they do that, the buy-in is very easy. People understand very easily, but then they want to know, well, how do I change my practice? And so there are organizations that support that process. Strategies 2.0 has modules. There's other there's sources of support, and there's also innovation and brainstorming as a community. How are we going to shift our practice? Sometimes there might be a sector where there's not a lot of work. Maybe your initiative will be the ones to brainstorm and innovate, and then share that so that others can benefit from what you've learned. So that's just the echo of it does need to be cross sector, because if a person experiences trauma-informed schooling but not trauma-informed medical care or trauma-informed juvenile justice interaction, they're still being re-traumatized, and that's harming their health and well-being. So
Carrie just shared the link. Carrie just shared the link to strategies for a link for trainings on trauma-informed care at no cost to your organization. So.
Oh yeah, that's a very important point. So not only do they have their modules for trauma-informed training practice for your organization, it is free to people in the state of California. So definitely take that up. Yeah. And so the next slide, which is completely empty for you, we're going to start filling it in, are key findings from SAMHSA's listening sessions. So SAMHSA, after collecting all this information, wants to share it. And if you go to their website, they have, some reports that you can read and download. But here are some key findings from those listening sessions that we'll go through one by one. So the first is that out in the field, people who've been doing this work for a little while now, there are varying approaches, I talked about that earlier, to addressing trauma and building resilience depending on local resources, cultures, and circumstances. And that's great. There's no template that you can give someone, even when we're going to look at a couple of communities a little later on and their approach and what their strategic plan kind of looks like. But there's no template that one community can take from another and just fully apply it. So having that flexibility and a template can help you get started and get thinking and give you some ideas to get going. But knowing that to gather momentum in your community, you'll have to, there'll be somewhat of a creative process. And that's what leads to varying approaches that are effective. And then again, repeating that many of the initiatives that have taken off, they are across agencies and across sectors. I forgot to give you the bullet point. And so then next, education about trauma and resilience addresses prevention, treatment, supports, and social justice. So that's kind of an echo of their previous points. It needs to include all those components. A focus on building strengths while addressing challenges. So that asset-based approach, I think many people perhaps on this call, given the work that you do, you've been familiar with youth development literature and assets-based approaches, and it continues. And as we look at taking trauma-informed approach and start to understand what that means, being asset-based is relevant here too. So it's very important to focus on not just telling the story of what went wrong, but what are the strengths, not just what went wrong with individuals, but also not just what went wrong with this community. What are the strengths? Where are we building from? While, of course, addressing the challenges. Next, to recognize the need to address trauma in the workforce. That's a huge one. I know that some of the larger initiatives have shared that even after they have that buy-in process as an organization, not necessarily a collaborative, but as an organization within a sector, they've done the training and then realized they have to address that people both bring their traumas into their work life, and also some workplaces can be traumatizing and they have to adjust their practices. And that actually has to be intentionally addressed. You can't just assume because you get a training about trauma that the practices in your own organization automatically shift. There has to be a conscious process. And so that's one learning that has come through all of this research. The next piece, funding for the effort varies among communities. So just saying that, I can say from my experience in the Bay Area, some of these initiatives have a little bit of funding and some have none, but they still manage to gather momentum. And one of the great things about being across agency and cross sector, many times the people around the table are able to offer, sort of in-kind resources, a space, or they happen to own. There's a documentary called Resilience, which kind of goes over both what are ACEs, what is resilience, and highlights organizations and communities that have done work around this. And so sometimes someone around that table already has that film, and you can create an event around it. So a lot of times you're collaborative, so you don't necessarily have funding, but you're able to do a lot even without funding. And in some cases, those collaboratives have been able to get a little bit of funding to assist with events. And finally, networking is key, as always, and that kind of echoes that same point, that just having all of those different people around the table, you're often able to do a lot with very little. And so I've talked a lot about the different ways that communities can have built and what has been learned through the efforts of communities building resilience initiatives. And so we have someone on the call today, Barbara DeGrasse. Gail's going to tell us a little bit more about Barb, and then she's going to share her direct experience of working on a community resilience initiative. So I'll turn it over to Gail briefly.
Thank you, Danielle. So let me just quickly introduce Barb. I've been working with Barb for a couple years now. Barb, after 30 years working in social services in the state of New Jersey, she retired to South Lake Tahoe in 2009. So since then, since 2017, she's been facilitating the Learning Communities for Strategies 2.0, the Sierra Region one, since the project began in 2017. And she's also active in her local community as a CASA, so as part of the court CASA, which is the court-appointed special advocate program. She volunteers with youth and is in the seasonal warming room working with adults experiencing homelessness. So Barb, do you want to talk a little about the Sierra Learning Community and being the community manager for that site?
Happy to. So just one thing I wanted to also note about the resilience video, our CASA office in South Lake Tahoe, Court-Appointed Special Advocates, a few years ago, we were able to partner with our library and purchase it at the library rate of like $95. So there's a lot of different ways you can obtain these videos and these resources, as Danielle was talking about. So yeah, thanks so much, Danielle and Gail. I'm the Learning Community Facilitator for the 10-County Sierra region. And thank you, Courtney, for saying you've heard great things about me from Dee Dee. I am the Learning Community Facilitator for the 10-County Sierra region. There are 6 regions throughout the state of California. We don't have a poll up, but I would ask, if you haven't attended a learning community in your area, Carrie put the strategiesca.org website up earlier. Go and make sure you investigate and research some of the learning communities that are available to you. Like everything Strategies does, it's free, it's fun. You can attend online, you can attend at a remote site, which Mono County has had remote sites, or you can attend at our hub in Jackson, and every region has a similar model where we have a hub, we have remote sites, and online. And it's a great way to build a resilience movement. I utilize the ACES Connection website in a few ways, and I'll talk about each of them. But just as a quick overview, I do outreach for all my learning community events on a community that Gail and I set up a while ago. I find subject matter experts and speakers that can come to the learning communities from the ACES Connection website. And I also, and most importantly, I think for all of us as we're doing this work, I try to stay informed about what's happening in the field. And I use the ACES Connection as a resource for the learning communities, and I can share those resources with all my participants. So it's a way to keep your movement going forward. So just as a little bit about as an outreach tool, I utilize the calendar, the blog posts, the resources, and the video sections. And Gail is a huge help to me. She worked with me to create the Strategies 2.0 Sierra Regional Community, which, as it's described on the slide, we use as a way to keep a regional identity and learn about things that we're doing throughout the Sierra Nevada region. I have 21 members so far. I'm trying to build that. I also joined a number of communities in the state and within my own region. So, for example, I'm a member of, in addition to my Strategies 2.0 Sierra region, I'm a member of the Strategies 2.0 Northern Regional Community. I'm a member of the El Dorado County ACES Collaborative Community and Resilient Amador, which started recently. I think they started it maybe about within the last year or so. So this is a great way to share information. I think when I'm having an upcoming learning community, I'll post that information, and then Gail does her magic. She waves her magic wand, and she shares the website. She shares the information with other communities on the website. And Gail, and I think some of the other folks as well, will share information with us, the Strategies Sierra region, about what's going on in other communities. So I would say we probably are able to touch about 200 different people in all these different communities when we're posting on the ACES community, on the ACES Connection website. This is a great way. After a learning community event, I post follow-up information, resources, links to the videos, because all our learning communities, like these webinars, are recorded and they're put on a Strategies YouTube channel, and that's a resource for everyone throughout the state to use for training, just for anything that you can look and see if there's an area that you're interested in or you need information. So it's really, really helpful, I think. And again, all free and all available to everyone. So it's a great outreach tool. I also use it as a way to find speakers and subject matter experts. And Gail's going to show you a little later how you can search for speakers and trainers on the ACES Connection website. It's super easy. For my last learning community, one of the presenters was somebody that I located using this feature. You can search by the topic you're looking for a particular speaker in. You can look by geographic area. You can see how much they charge. Not everyone puts that in, but a lot of folks will. So you can kind of strategize and think, I think that person's a little too expensive for me. Many folks charge very little or just travel time. And you can message people directly in this area. So you can, reach out to folks. And then I try to stay informed about developments in the field, and this goes beyond my learning community work. It goes into my CASA work, my work in the warm room in South Lake Tahoe. I will warn you, you have to be very careful. I sign up for the regular email, so I get daily ACES emails and then a weekly update. And there's always something of interest that I click on, and it's like a rabbit hole you can go down, and there's so much information. But it is a wonderful way to stay on top of research, news in the field. I put an ACES Connection folder on my Gmail, and that's a place where I save information. Just today, I went on a link to a Robert Wood Johnson website that talked about the difference between equity and equality and had a really cool graphic in English and Spanish. So there's just something almost every day that you can use in your resilience work. I know there's probably a lot more that can be done. I learn something every time I hear Gail or anybody from the ACES Connection do a presentation. So, but those are the areas that I've really focused on in the last couple of years.
Okay. Oh, well, thank you, Barb. That was great. We were hoping, we wanted to have someone who is actually actively doing this in the community and digging deep using the ACES Connection and Strategies 2.0 platforms, but also in the community and interacting. So I think Barb just gave us a great picture of how you can get going and how you can use these different tools to keep you going. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing the story of your work.
Great, thanks.
And in this next slide, let's see. I lost control. Okay, there we go. What you see in front of you is you can think of it as the organizing model for ACES Connection. We call it Growing Resilient Communities 2.0. So again, it was great hearing directly from Barb because so many of the things that she talked about that she does are captured in this model. When you navigate to this resource, which is right on our homepage, you can actually go to an interactive version of it and click on each of these parts of the cycle. So you have educate, engage, activate, and celebrate. And you can actually click and see just like many of the things that Barb was talking about, you can click and see this is what communities are doing and under each of these realms. And we're gonna delve more deeply into each stage of this model in our next webinar that Gail mentioned that's targeted for the fall. But one important thing to highlight now is very deliberately, it's a cycle that doesn't stop because that's really how it goes. It's not a linear process in which we have accomplished educating the community. We are done engaging. We've activated our community. It's ready to go on its own, and we'll have a celebration, and we're done. It's really an ongoing process, and you can sometimes even groups that I'm working with will feel like they're not doing enough, or are we there yet? Have we arrived? But every single thing you do to increase that awareness and get your community actively working and just kind of understanding from that different framework. If you've heard this material before, you're familiar with shifting the phrase, shifting your perspective from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. Making that shift happen is really a cultural shift. And so it's just sort of an ongoing cycle, and every step that you take, and as you heard from Barb, all of those pieces help create that shift. So, look for our next webinar where we'll kind of dive deep into each of these stages and how we encourage communities to use them to, once they've started their community, to grow their community. Okay, and so now with the next few slides, I'm going to be just talking about some first early steps that communities take and that are really helpful it helps keep, by starting here, it helps keep your initiative going. We're going to talk about all the different ways in the next webinar that people can get stuck, but some of the ways people avoid those stuck pieces is by giving a little attention to these early steps of establishing what their collaborative is about. So we're going to start with, as you can see on your screen, mission and value statements. So these are similar things that people might do in their organizations, but it's important to bring that over to your collaborative work as well. So just starting with some mission statements, very simple. And if you've done this process with your own organization before, or if you've already done it with any other type of collaborative initiative, you know that even though these questions are simple, they can take hours and days to really get everyone in the room to feel good about that final mission statement. And that's a worthy process, especially because we know from the SAMHSA research and from experience that the best way for a resilience initiative to thrive is for it to be cross-sector. But now you have people who speak very different languages in their field, so it makes this mission statement process so important. So you can start to develop that common language. So what we have here are these simple questions. What does your initiative plan to do and how? Why does your initiative exist? What does your initiative serve? And don't worry, I'm going to show you places on ACES Connection where people have begun to grapple with this, and you can go and dig deep and bring that into your work. So you don't necessarily have to start from scratch, although you'll, of course, innovate for your particular community. So here's just an example from the American Red Cross of their mission statement, very simple. To prevent and alleviate human suffering in the face of emergencies by mobilizing the power of volunteers and the generosity of donors. So I'm sure it probably took weeks to come up with that, maybe months, but the final version really helps people understand why the American Red Cross, why are we in the picture? And so that's what you want to create for your own resilience initiatives. And what we have here are some other examples from ACES Connection communities, whether they're on ACES Connection or not. And so you can just take a look at this one. The Menominee tribe and county have been dedicated to becoming trauma informed, and they give you a little bit of history, how they came through fostering futures, and their goal is to strengthen resiliency through culture, acknowledging trauma-informed care and bringing ACES education to our community. And you'll notice when we set up communities on ACES Connection, we always try to, this will be one of the first steps, we'll set up the page, people will come up with a title, and we try to get some initial statement about what is your initiative about. And you can always change it as you go through a process or grow your community and have more members. But it is great to have that orienting mission statement. Next, developing a value statement is very important. Again, some simple questions, but it brings those sectors together on a common goal of building a resilience initiative. So what does your initiative envision for the future? What is the big picture? And what does your initiative aim to accomplish? And these are some very important questions. Not only does it bring different sectors together, but it helps you to have a little bit of momentum so you feel like you know where you're going. This is very simple, but I've seen groups that get stuck because they don't have an answer to that question. So on the one hand, you're coming together because you recognize how important this is, but what keeps people coming to meetings or keeps people in the planning for an event is just having some idea of what you're aiming for, that you can kind of return to and link your events and activities to. And this is a good point to point out that each group figures out what their capacity is, and I've seen these communities work very well, whether they meet monthly, which some elect to do, or quarterly. One of the groups that I work with, their steering committee for their ACES initiative meets just quarterly, but they'll do work groups on specific topics. And they just had this is Solano County, they just had an amazing Resilient Summit. They got community members to attend on a Saturday morning, and it had a lot of great content. And they meet quarterly, so you don't necessarily have to meet frequently to do big work. You do what, and then another community that I was a part of in Sacramento, we thought maybe they'd want to move to quarterly, but they very much enjoyed coming and hearing from one another and other speakers, just thinking about the different ways that trauma-informed practices and resilience practices could be adapted in different sectors. So they didn't want to go to quarterly meetings. They wanted to keep up that monthly meeting. So each group, you'll figure out what makes sense, but don't think that you have to structure it a specific way or it won't work. We see it, all of the facilitators see it working in different ways. And so, and just to look at the vision for the Alzheimer's Association, a world without Alzheimer's disease, very simple and succinct. And it helps you just tap into each of your activities, each of your events. This is what you're after. That's what you want to come up with for your resilience initiative. And so next we'll talk a little bit about creating norms. I think most organizations by now understand that it's important to have, office norms and meeting norms, organizational norms. And this continues to be important. This is a collaborative. People are volunteering their time, or perhaps your organization has seen this is very important, so you're able to go during work time to contribute to a resilience initiative. But again, people are coming from very different organizational cultures, very different fields, different types of, it's very important to make sure that we're all on the same page of how we're going to conduct ourselves in our meetings and what we're going to value. So again, it may seem very simple, but from all of our experiences, the ACES Connection facilitators, skipping this step causes problems later. So it's really important to establish early on. And so, here is just some, if you've done this before, you probably have your own process. If not, we have some resources in the ACES Connection that can help you get started or model a process. But here are just some basic ideas to think about. How do you engage? How do we operate? Because that's one place where people can get stuck, because we don't know, should we share our minutes publicly? We don't know who's taking notes. We don't know these basic things. And so just taking the time up front to figure these things out as a collaborative turns out to be very important. Code of conduct. And I would say there's a lot of things to include in the code of conduct, but as a resilience initiative, you want to make sure that the space is trauma informed and give a little thought to what that means, and include that explicitly in your code of conduct. And then bylaws, for the same reasons, operating norms. There's just things that come up in your organization. How what the process and protocol is. You're starting a new collaborative. It just needs to be clear to everyone, because everyone comes in with expectations that are based on their own organizations, and then you can have unnecessary conflict or difficulties because people's expectations aren't matching. So taking the time to set bylaws in the beginning, everyone kind of knows how we're doing things around here. And so one of our facilitators at ACES Connection, who's also a California facilitator, Laura Kane, she likes to say, it helps us all row together. Like, we know what we're doing. I don't know a whole lot about crew, but I know a little bit. And so I know that's really important. You can't all be rowing in different ways. You have to do it together if you want to get across the river. And so another thing to think about when you're creating norms is that they align with the goals, which you will have done a process of establishing a mission and some mission statements and value statements, a vision for where you're going. It should allow for all members to participate. That's part of being trauma informed, and it also just increases people's buy-in to what the operating norms are. And then should increase productivity and effectiveness. So in some ways, when we start here and say this is the beginning of the process, it sounds very bureaucratic, and people are coming because they're passionate. They've been activated by the knowledge that by preventing trauma and healing people's trauma, we can get better outcomes. And then now we're talking about more of a bureaucratic process. So it's not, the idea of it is not to just create a bureaucracy around your collaborative, but to help you work more productively and effectively. Because again, from experience, I know people end up having difficulties because they haven't established this first step. So it's so simple, and it doesn't have to be elaborate. Just what's going to help you know what you're doing each time you come to your meetings, and how you're going to follow up on the goals you set for your collaborative. So, and it should also increase efficiency. And this is just an example, and this is a great example because it's so simple. It's just 4. Respect one another. All voices should be heard. No triangulation, which there might be people on the call who have the best clinical explanation, but what I can tell you, it's just instead of people talking together and resolving things, we're having side conversations in different places and not addressing conflicts together. So avoiding that, and I would say you would want to develop some norms around how do people have healthy communication and feel like they can be heard. And then and part of that is no assumptions and asking for clarification. So developing a set of simple norms, you don't want to have like 20 norms. You want to have something around 4, maybe up to 8, that you can go over in every meeting or have printed on your agenda, just to remind people that this is what we're doing. It makes a big difference. And so next, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about strategic planning. So once organizations kind of figure out, here's what we're doing, here's how often we're going to come together, and this is what's going to happen when we come together, they want to think a little bit bigger about what's coming down the road. And so some basic questions, and I know everyone does this in their workplaces to some extent. So where are we now? Where do we want to be? And how will we get there? And so asking yourself those basic questions, this becomes very important to do just for keeping up momentum over time. So when you have that plan in place, you've asked yourself these questions, it doesn't matter the amount of time that it takes, or even if you set a timeline and it takes you twice as long. But what keeps everyone kind of excited and wanting to keep this meeting on their calendar, work together, is having answers to those questions. So what you see here is an example from the El Dorado County ACEs connection. They use a spreadsheet, and what they like about it is it enables them to identify and write down what their goals are and think about the issues and make sure that they give it a timeline and make sure they assign people to the task so they can come back to the meetings and feel like, oh, look, we've moved forward. And they tie it to an objective. And so this is something they've been using for quite a while, and it's linked to, they have plans by sector. So this is not an organization that I work directly with, but this is I know that they've been using it for a while, and this is something that they value. If they feel like that keeps them moving forward, being able to link back to this spreadsheet. So that's their style. And okay. Also on the ACEs Connection website, we have actually quite a few posts like this. You see at the top of the slide under the ACES connection, it says Growing Resilient Communities 2.0. That's a tag. And when you click on it, you'll get a few different posts around this organizing model. You can see the pictures on this page as well. And so different types of posts that help you understand each of those stages a little bit better are all tagged as Growing Resilient Community 2.0. So if you click on that, you'll get a bunch of posts. And this is one of them on strategic goals. And so I won't read it word for word, but you can see it. It's presenting some ideas from the National Collaborative on Adversity and Resilience. And I've said many of these things, but you can return to this as you're thinking about how you're going to move forward with your strategic goals. So creating a common language, the educate piece, identifying the strategies that make the most sense for your community, engaging all members of your community and sectors, and figuring out how to increase and leverage public and private funding. And we're having conversations on the ACES Connection page because different communities have found some really unique ways of doing that. So ACES Connection is a great place to keep pace with, or just find out other ideas. You hear a community is figuring out how to get funding for per event or different types of strategies. And so when you're thinking about your initiative or your first community education event, you can get ideas for how other communities have funded theirs. And then the final one, develop strong and adaptive leadership among the members of your organization. And also, not everyone is going to join your collaborative, but there can sometimes be some very strong partnerships that you can forge. They believe in your work. They're not able to attend or make it a regular commitment, but they can support in some key ways. And we've seen different communities have some very effective partnership leveraging. So those are all some things to keep in mind when you get to that stage of building strategic goals with your initiatives. And here is an example. I have the slide in here just because, we showed you the El Dorado County slide, just to underscore the point that people are approach this in very different ways. And you can see this is a relatively recent strategic planning. They were looking towards 2019 resilience. It says Resilience Reno County. A note that I have about it is that it's from Hutchinson, Kansas. And this is one city that was profiled by SAMHSA, who was supporting those resilience initiatives. So on the one hand, you have El Dorado County with their spreadsheet by sector that they swear by, and it really works for them. And here you have this graphic designer took notes on the conversation and created this beautiful, colorful strategic plan. And they have it all on one page, and they know where they're going, and this is what works for them. There's no one right way. And what I'm showing you here, this is from Solano County. I mentioned they just had a resilience summit, and as they were building towards having this summit, it was just this past Saturday, May 18th, they developed a resilience plan for Solano, and it was a steering group of a collaboration, like many of you are thinking of beginning or already involved in. And they spent about a year developing this resilience plan, and they presented it at this resilience summit, which included not just, it was on a Saturday morning, so not just providers, but also community members. And community members really came out and heard, they got basic information about ACES, but also got engaged in creating this plan and building out its activities. And they used the ACES connection model to educate, engage, activate, celebrate to kind of frame it, and then came up with their own activities for how they're going to approach their plan. And then I love how they then brought the community in to help them further develop it in the summit. So next we'll spend just a little time talking about anticipating challenges. And I think what we're going to do is I'm going to ask this question and have you write it down, but I'm realizing we still need a little bit of time for a few more slides that Gail's going to cover. So I probably won't read the chat items right now, and then maybe when we transfer to Gail, she can highlight a couple too. But I would like you to take the time to answer the question by typing in the chat. What are the biggest challenges you have encountered or think you might encounter in your effort to start a resilience initiative? And that's one reason working with a community facilitator from ACES Connection can be helpful, because we've had these experiences with people, and we're often an observer, sometimes observer participant, but we're in a more neutral position, and so we've really learned a lot, and that we can then carry to other communities. So I encourage you to think about what some of your concerns about challenges are, and to share them in the chat. And with that, I'm going to keep going through the slides so we can turn it over to Gail. Challenges groups have faced can be a lack of trust, power struggles, not being able to agree on goals, and being challenged to stick to the priorities. And to be honest, doing that first process that I started off with, those norms and values, it prevents a lot of this. Particularly the lack of agreement on goals, really, you might think that could happen at any time, but it really comes because everyone had different ideas and they never talked about, and they forged forward, they started planning their events and activities, but they had never had that step. But when they take the time just to come up with what our goals are, it gives them a framework so they can come back and say, well, do we want to expand our goals? Do we want to drop this goal? It makes the conversation go much more smoothly, and it doesn't really get to the point of that type of disagreement. The disagreement is really because they never had agreement in the first place. And then the challenge to stick to the priorities is they just had no method. They didn't do the strategic planning. They don't have their version of the spreadsheet or the graphic notes to know where they're going. So again, it leads to a little bit of confusion. So there's some really simple organizational processes that can take place that help prevent that. And then the lack of trust and power struggles, that's where the norms come in handy. It's really important to establish that, because then you'll know when someone is straying from that, and you have a trauma-informed way of helping people remember that, well, this is how we're gonna row together in this conversation. We talked about it. It's on our agenda. Let's return to that. So, but it's hard to do that if you haven't established a framework in the beginning. And so my final slide is the benefits of a facilitator, that person who can be a little bit more neutral and can help keep everyone's focus on the process, why they came together, remind them of the norms and mission and the value and the priorities. And it's great to have a person in the room who's serving that function when you can set that up. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Gail, who's going to share how ACES Connection and different resources that we have on our website can help with this process, and where you can find information and all that good stuff. So I'm going to turn it back over to Gail. And we'll go from there. And I'm hoping that worked.
Oh, sorry. I was talking. I had myself on mute. I was talking. So hopefully everybody is seeing. So I'm live on ACES Connection now, and this is a blog post, and right up here is what Danielle was talking about, Growing Resilient Communities 2.0. But what I'm gonna do here is, hold on, I'm moving around here quickly. This is the home site of ACES Connection. So what I wanted to do was show you, I'm gonna scroll down, and if this is on the home site and it's always here, these things on the left-hand side change as we post or other people on from the community post, but the right-hand side, these things stay the same. So if you look right here at Growing Resilient Communities 2.0, this is exactly what Danielle was talking about. So right here is the interactive graphic. So you can click on this and get the interactive graphic and get information for each of those 4 categories. And again, we'll go into more detail on this in the next webinar that we're doing. But today, that blog post that I just clicked on, starting your ACES initiative, takes you to this blog post. And this is what we try to do is keep these things updated. So as we have new great, like the Solano County just came out. Danielle, you just got it yesterday, right? So as we get new materials, we will update things here. But this, like anything that's hyperlinked or anything that's blue, is hyperlinked. So there's sample agendas, handouts to describe reasons to start, cross-sector representation. So this is just a lot. Here's all the mission, vision, values. So all of these things that Danielle talked about today. So we're not going to go into detail on this, but some different community member agendas. You can spend a lot of time, as Barb said, you can get lost, get sucked down that ACES hole. But this is a great place to go to find, to get sort of reinforce what Danielle went through and find some good examples. So I wanted to show you that. And then I also, since I'm here, I wanted to show you, let me go, this is the homepage again, or this is the header across the homepage. And what Barb had mentioned was the speakers and trainers. So it's right there on the home site, speakers and trainers, and you can click on the speakers and trainers. It takes just a minute to load up. And this is the ACES Connection Speakers and Trainers Bureau. And here's the map. You click on the map. And then, as Barb said, here, we're going to move this a little bit. But this shows you different speakers by, so we're here in California, so we want to focus in, but it will give you different speakers that have signed up to join ACES, to be part of the Speakers Bureau. And as Barb said, you can search by different sectors. So if you're interested in somebody that's doing childcare, then we've got the map itself will zone in on just those that have said that they are doing childcare. And then you can click on who they are and where they're from. And then also by subsectors. So if you want after school programs, that kind of thing. So take a look at that. Then I'm gonna, let's see, now I'm gonna go back to my slides. This, again, the slides are gonna be available for you, but what we tried to do is put a link of a whole bunch of different information that you might be interested in. So some of which we went through, some of which we didn't, but I'd encourage you to link, to take a link. We've got strategies in there. The Mobilize in Action for Resilient Communities was an initiative that has a lot of great information in it. And then just looking here, the California community. So there's a link to the California ACES Action site, and then the Northern California, or the strategies, the California strategies communities that we have. So, and then this is that list that I showed you of the California site. So those resources are all there. Now what I want to do, before we go next, what I want to do is just summarize, because I was taking notes to the chat because Danielle wanted, we didn't have time to go through the chat, but I did see a few things and I thought that they're great, what you guys said. So I'm going to go from actually the last to the first. So somebody said, I'm sorry, I didn't write down the names, but somebody said, it was actually Carrie, talked about burnout and the need for new leadership, that the same people are taking the lead often. And we have definitely seen that oftentimes the people, those of us that are working on these initiatives are doing it because we're passionate about it, and we're the same people, or they are the same people working on many things. So there is a need to bring in new leaders, and that is definitely a challenge. Another challenge that came up was the time commitment and how to find, and I think those two kind of go together, the challenge of limited participation because of limited time. And then another issue was about the alignment of strategic planning and getting those community organizations involved, and aligning the strategic planning. And then the fourth one was funding. So just a couple of my comments, and then if you, Danielle, if you want to pipe up. But a couple of comments that I have are that well, just with burnout, I mean, we need to start with ourselves first. You know, it's putting that what's it called? You know, the air thing on the flight. We have to put our mask on first. And so burnout is an issue, but we want to practice what we preach, and we want to start internal. And we say that with organizations all the time. For a school to be trauma-informed, a school needs to be supporting its teachers and its staff first and foremost before we can ask our teachers to be better supporting their students. So that did just the burnout kind of triggered me on that, is that's really important. And I think the issue around the alignment with organizations, that's all the reason to be to take the time to do this strategic planning and to really build trust and build relationships and build relationship as a group in your cross-sector community collaborative. Oftentimes when I'm involved in a couple communities where they're like full steam ahead, doing screenings of things and working on lots of special events, but didn't really come together as a community or as a group before along with doing all of those external things. So back to everything that Danielle was saying, take the time to do that. And one of the issues with funding, one thing that we have heard, and Tracy Favre, who I know has been on a strategy, she's the executive director of CASA in Yolo County, and she's very active in the Yolo County Resilient Yolo, it's called, and her organization, Yolo CASA, is trauma-informed, that organization as a whole. And she's brought it to the community and working very closely with Resilient Yolo, the entire community. And she likes to say we are an unfunded collaborative, because then the collaborative doesn't belong in any one organization, and it isn't seen for one population, but really is cross-sector and across the life course. And there really isn't just one set of organizations or one set of the population that needs to know about building resilience, addressing ACEs and trauma and building resilience, but it's really the entire community. That said, once there's enough momentum, and that's kind of happening now in Yolo County, there is a need. There's definitely been a challenge about needing some funding to do everything that they want to do as an initiative. So I don't know, Danielle, did you want to add anything to what I had said? If not, I'm going to move to our next slide. It's taking a little while here. Whoops, our next slide.
Yeah,
oh,
I've been making comments in the chat, so you can go forward, Gail.
Right.
Okay.
And we only have a couple of minutes left, so okay.
There we go. Yep. So the chat is, what would you like to know more about? What's missing from what we already went over, and what else would you like to know about is the question for the chat. And maybe just because I know we have time, just to remind you about the future webinar that we are planning to offer. which will go into, as Danielle said, it will go into more of those details with the, like, we really focused on how you start an initiative, but then how you grow an initiative. So stay tuned for more info on that. And I'm going to leave this slide up so that if you want to contact anybody from our region. So any questions or anything else? If not, Barb, Carrie, let me pass it back over to you. Oops, sorry, I'm just gonna go down here. But any questions or comments or anything else? Whoops, I'm trying to, sorry, Barb, Carrie, I'm trying to.
Okay.
It's just, my, there we go.
I can send it back.
Sorry, I'm doing it right now. It's just I moved my chat so that I could see it, and now I can't. There we go. All right. Yes. Okay, it's all yours.
All right. Obviously, we need another webinar. That's really obvious. Also, you'll all be getting an automatic evaluation following the webinar, and you can put some of your thoughts and questions and requests for future information within that evaluation that's going to come to you. So I just want to remind you really quick that you will receive the link to our YouTube channel where this webinar will be, as well as the past webinar and other webinars that have been done by Strategies, as well as the learning community recordings, as well as the vehicles for change. So lots of things on our Strategies 2.0 YouTube channel. And just really want to thank our presenters for all of the information that they gave us today. Just a wealth of information. Please do not feel like you are alone on this journey of developing your own resilient community. There are so many resources. I like what Barb DeGraff said. It's like going into a rabbit hole. So tie a rope around your waist before you start clicking so you can find your way back out. But there's so much rich information for you. And I know that these ladies are available to answer your questions. I believe their contact information will also be in the PowerPoint slides. So with that, without further ado, we just want to thank you all for participating today and sticking with us the whole time. And we will see you on our next webinar. Signing out.